Thank you, Madam Toastmasters, fellow Toastmasters, and very welcome guests. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about information online. Now, I assume most of you, hopefully, are staying home and quarantining yourself. And so the only way that you know what's going on, besides looking out your front window constantly, is by going online to check information, whether that's news sites, social media, however you're consuming information. No doubt you're going online to bring that new information in, whether it's good or bad. There's a whole other topic I'm not even going to touch. So the elephant in the room, obviously, COVID-19. Okay, so my disclaimer for this speech is that I'm not a physician, a politician, first responder, or anyone on the front lines of essential on-site businesses. And as a good Toastmasters, I'm going to try to stay nonpartisan. I'm not going to be political at all. But I am going to talk about information from different news outlets. So tonight, what I'm going to be covering is manufacturing consent. Basically, who's behind the content that is being shared. The low Bieber of entry. The fact that anyone can post information is also something that we have to deal with these days. And the fact that many online developers don't want us to think. They want the usability of the website to be so smooth and easy to use that we're not putting a lot of thought in, is this a legit source that I'm getting my information from? So point one, manufacturing consent. And that is, behind the scenes, there's always someone invested in what you think. They're manufacturing your consent, your opinion, your click, your view. Somebody behind the scene is generating this. And it was Noam Chomsky's book that he helped co-author, Manufacturing Consent. And subsequently, 4 years later, after the book came out in 1988, they came out with a documentary, Manufacturing Consent. I actually have a link there if anyone wants to take a screenshot or write it down. Or you could just Google YouTube, Manufacturing Consent. And it's a pretty impressive documentary. I saw it back in college as part of an elective and has resonated with me ever since. And with Noam Chomsky, a brilliant academic and lecturer, was trying to persuade in his book and documentary is that the mass communication media of the US are effective and powerful ideological institutions that carry out a system-supported propaganda function. What does that mean? Well, it means that somebody behind these massive news outlets, there's always a parent company. There's somebody that's cutting the checks, and they have a hidden agenda. They want the news told in a way that they agree with. So we're not always getting facts as facts. Sometimes we're getting them as shaded opinions. So when you're consuming some information online, you have to say, who is invested behind this view? Who's invested behind this story? Here's an example of the New York Times and Breitbart. Very much on both ends of the spectrum as far as political views, but they were basically talking about the same topic of this drug that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, had mentioned during one of the press briefings, and how they slanted that information and how they addressed that story it's very interesting. And why did they tell the story differently? Well, again, there's political agenda. There's maybe investors behind the scenes that want the story told in a certain angle to a certain audience to propagate a certain view. So whenever you're consuming information, ask yourself, who's behind the story? Who's invested behind my opinion? Another example, a little bit more close to home before the COVID-19, was the Wet'suwet'en protests, the blockades that were going all across Canada. And what was interesting, whatever your stance is on the blockades and what they were protesting was the coverage, how the story was being covered and how it was being told. Were these degenerate rogue protesters stopping the economic engine of Canada, or were they concerned citizens and owners of land pointing out some shady business practices of an oil company or a gas company? Again, what was being covered and why, and what wasn't being covered? These are questions you should be asking. Again, there's a hidden agenda. There's someone manufacturing your consent. The next thing that we have to deal with these days as far as information is what I call the low Bieber of entry, pun intended, the low barrier also. The fact that anyone can post anything. The first point was very much geared towards the mass media Mongols that we're familiar with, newspapers and news outlets. Now, with the power of social media, all the platforms from Facebook to Instagram to Twitter, anybody can post anything, anytime. A great example of this is Justin Bieber. How did he become famous? I used to listen to this great podcast. They're still making episodes. It's called I Love Marketing Podcast with Joe Polish and Dean Jackson. In one of their earlier episodes many years ago, they had suggested, if you really want to learn about marketing, watch Justin Bieber's documentary, Never Say Never. And I admit I did watch it. And I'll be honest with you, it's not that great. If you're not a fan of Justin Bieber, it's going to be totally irrelevant to you. But I did find the part how he ascended to stardom quite interesting. He was a kid that had posted some YouTube videos. He was discovered by what would become his manager, Scooter Braun, I believe his name is. And they started going from radio station to radio station because nobody was going to play his songs. He just sounded too young and he looked too young. So he actually visited every radio station playing an acoustic version of his songs. And Justin would tweet where he was going next. He would tweet, hey fans, I'm going to be at this radio station tomorrow. Come check me out. And what was interesting is a few kids would show up at the next radio station, and then a few more, and then a few more. And eventually it got to Beatlemania, and they had to shut down streets and call in the cops. And what was interesting, the head of security in the documentary says, I don't think anyone ever realized the power of social networking was or is. It just, how he ascended to stardom is a classic example of good marketing and probably a combination of some luck and timing and all that good stuff. The dark side of social media, so if you want to think of Justin Bieber becoming famous as an example of any of us could post and become famous or become a social influencer, there's also a dark side, obviously. And a great book that illustrates all of that is the book from Ryan Holiday, Trust Me, I'm Lying, Confessions of a Media Manipulator. And he would explain exploits after exploit of how he would tweak Wikipedia entries. He would start protests to help his clients get publicity for movies. He would do all sorts of scandalous things. And when I was watching an interview when he was promoting this book, he said, although there are more critics, meaning watchdogs, they pale in comparison to the power of the machine to generate ideas and spread narratives. But it doesn't matter because those narratives take hold online and spread so fast, it almost doesn't matter what someone says an hour later, proving that it's not true. Meaning, if a news outlet and if somebody posted a meme spreading fake information, if it becomes viral, it really doesn't matter if it's fact or fiction. At that point, it's already spread a narrative and the damage or the purpose has been accomplished. So that is something that we do have to be wary of and tackle these days. The other point that I want to bring up tonight is the fact that a lot of websites use a standardization. They don't want their users to think. They want their website to be smooth and usable. So this becomes problematic because we don't know what's real and fake. They both look the exact same. And he addresses this in a great book, Don't Make Me Think. Steve Krug, sorry, the author of this book that I'm currently digesting. And he says, in reference to making a website very usable, he says, when you're creating a site, your job is to get rid of question marks, meaning you don't want the user to think how to use the website. You just want them to consume the information or to purchase the product. And we can start to see this across the board. On the left is more a reputable news website. On the right is a little bit more of kind of fringe news source that has been charged with various scandalous slander, I would say, in the past. And it just blurred out everything just to make it difficult to identify who's who. But you'll notice they have kind of a similar format, right? This is because there's more of a standard usability across the internet. So we have a navigation bar, we have a nice photo in the middle that captures the viewer's attention, kind of a larger text headline. This one's blurred out. If I just gave you these websites unblurred, you would intuitively know where to poke around and how to view the website. And that's because there's a standardization. And what's happening is because everything starts to look legit, people start to think it's legit. So in review, when you're looking at information, and we're all going to be looking at information in the foreseeable future, whether it's weeks, months, who knows, you need to ask yourself these three questions. Who is invested in my clicks and opinion? Who behind the scenes is invested? Is this a low Bieber entry? Meaning, did somebody just post this? Or was there real effort and resources put into it? Is there sites and sources? Is there something substantial behind some of this information that we're consuming? And ask yourself from time to time, what am I not thinking about on this site, post, and video? Just because it looks legit doesn't mean it is legit. Am I being fooled by just a common usability that's popular these days? That's my suggestion for your information consumption. Everyone, please be safe, and I thank you very much for your time.